If you want to limit the data that appears in a pivot table, you have many different ways to do it. For example, you could select which values you want to appear. If you have a lot of values, that can be kind of tedious. If possible, you should try to define a rule that allows you to tell Excel quickly which values to include and which to exclude from the pivot table in your filter. In this movie, I will show you how to create rule-based filters so that you can effectively limit the data inside of your pivot table. I will use the rule sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 3 folder of your exercise files archive. This table summarizes the number of new customers acquired for quarters 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the years 2012 and 2013 for 4 regions, Northeast, South, and West. Let's say that I want to limit the data to only quarters 3 and 4. So in other words, what I want to do is define a rule that causes the pivot table to only display quarters with numbers greater than 2. So I can define a rule to that effect. To do that, I'll click any cell in the pivot table, as I've done here, and then over in the pivot table fields pane, I'll point to the quarter field header, and then move the mouse pointer over its downward pointing black triangle. And when I click it, I get a shortcut menu with a number of filtering tools. In this case, I want to filter by the label, and the label is the value that appears here, 4, 3, 2, and 1 at the edge of the pivot table defining its contents. So I'll point to label filters, and then from the list that appears, I'll select greater than. And you can see that there are quite a few other rules that you could create, but in this case, I'll just use greater than as an example. So when I click it, the label filter dialog box appears. The show items for which the label box says is greater than, so that's my comparison operation. And now I can define the value that I want to use for the comparison. In this case, I want to show values for all quarters that are greater than 2. So I'll type 2 and click OK. Doing so applies the filter to the body of the pivot table, and now I only see results for quarters 3 and 4. And as always, if I want to remove that filter, I can click the Undo button on the Quick Access toolbar, and doing so takes away my last action, which was applying the filter. Rules are extremely powerful ways of filtering your pivot table. If you can define one, you can save a lot of work.